Man, it is getting harder and harder to make ends meet. Immigration is suppressing wages and making housing nearly impossible to find. Feminism has corrupted nearly every woman that I meet who is my age in some way or another. I'm uncomfortable with how much our nation supports Israel's wars in the Middle East. Crime has skyrocketed since a certain people group got introduced to my neighborhood who seem to be incompatible with my values. Is there something we can do about all of these doofuses?
He said doofuses! Ah! He said a bad word! I need to tweet at this guy's pastor. Did you know your congregant holds racist views? Ah! He's upset that women aren't chaste. What is he? Some kind of a misogynist? Ah!
This is only a slight exaggeration of something I've been seeing in a certain sect of online discourse, but I do think it kind of extends beyond into the broader conversation. So, let's talk about it. Hi folks, I'm Paul, and this is my take. Now, this video might be a little niche, but this is a frequent thing that I see within a lot of the circles that I follow and engage in on social media. These circles, particularly, being politics and theology and the intersection of the two. Like I said, this video might be a little niche, so if you're unaware, last week, a couple of clips from a podcast called The Rift went viral. If you've never heard of it, it's a political discussion show hosted by Elijah Schaffer, in which he brings on a series of guests to discuss a relevant and often controversial topic. Elijah is known for being a bit of a wild card. He can be pretty crass at times, and he is rarely deterred from shying away from some of the more uncomfortable subjects. I don't tune into his show very frequently, and that's mostly just because I don't really care for his sense of humor. But when I do give it a listen, I find that he and his guests will usually have a pretty insightful discussion. I might not always agree with his conclusions, but I appreciate his arguments and how he gets to those conclusions. Anyway, this past week, several clips from his show went viral in the theological and political circles within X. These clips featured Elijah using some vulgar language to illustrate some of his frustrations with a lot of modern women. I think the main reason these clips went viral, though, was because of the guest that was featured in this episode, which was a pastor by the name of Joel Webbon. And he is also known for having some pretty controversial takes within these circles. I'd say most of the people who were commenting on these clips were upset because Joel didn't immediately step in and correct Elijah for his use of untoward words. Some people were upset that he had thoughts of his own that didn't contradict Elijah's. And some people were upset that he appeared on the show in the first place. Now, I probably know less about Joel Webbon than I do about Elijah Schaffer. I've never watched or listened to an episode of his theological podcast, but nearly on a weekly basis, I'll see at least one post of somebody complaining about something that he said in his podcast or a tweet that he made. And I'm sorry, but personally, I'd say 9 times out of 10, I don't see what the big deal is. I don't think I've ever seen him use foul language. The ideas he expresses are, I guess, a little offensive by modern liberal standards, but most of the time, they're pretty hard to refute, and he backs them up with some biblical context. And because of that, I don't know how so many people can make the assertion that he's being sinful in doing this. I guess the worst thing I've seen him do recently was maybe use some rude words to illustrate a point that he then nuanced down the line, like an attention-getting tactic. Now, I agree, Elijah's language can be pretty vulgar at times, and it doesn't really help us when we're careless about the words that we choose to express our ideas. We should be more mindful about how we conduct ourselves and represent our ideas. That being said, I am beginning to feel a lot of frustration towards people on my supposed side of the aisle. In the vast majority of clips that I see featuring Joel or Elijah, they are addressing a very real issue within our society. Issues that many people in political leadership or church leadership have very little willingness to confront in any kind of meaningful way. But the responses to the videos of Joel or Elijah addressing these issues are very rarely addressing the substance of their commentary, but rather criticizing the way in which they choose to present these ideas. I don't like your tone. Shame on you for using a mean word. I see a flurry of turgid tattletale church lady behavior, often from the same accounts reacting to content by Joel or Elijah or people who share their ideas. And it's kind of funny, I think these reactions are what led me to actually know who Joel Webbon is. I'll see a post saying the equivalent of, "Look at this horrible thing this pastor said." And then I watch the full clip and I end up saying to myself, I don't know, it seemed pretty reasonable. Yeah, okay, maybe he could have said it in a nicer way. But something I've come to realize pretty recently is niceness is not a fruit of the Spirit. Now, kindness is, but niceness is not. And I think a lot of people within the modern church have confused these two concepts. Sometimes there's not a nice way to tell the truth. Sometimes the truth and reality are pretty mean, but that doesn't mean telling the truth is unkind. I am growing increasingly tired of seeing people chastise these men and those who agree with them only for the way in which they choose to speak, while ignoring the substance of their speech. Oftentimes it comes across as them just not wanting them to talk about the things that they're talking about. How about you tell me why they're wrong about these things? Or tell me why they're right, but their approach is wrong, and tell me what you think the right things are to do concerning the problems that they're addressing, rather than just scolding them for using rude words. I did a video a couple of weeks ago about how young men are returning to church, but this kind of behavior is probably a major contributing factor as to why they were leaving the church in the first place. It does seem like most issues that affect men, when they're brought up, men have been chided, scolded, pushed aside. It's not really something that we want to deal with. And that's just the thing. This is the perfect opportunity for the church to minister to these young men. The controversial things that Joel and Elijah talk about are topics that men are dealing with. They make the comment that these things are outcroppings of liberalism, and that's true, they are. And it seems as though that way of thinking has maybe become an idol for a lot of people. I am a young man who experiences a lot of the problems, and I have a lot of the same questions that are brought up by people like Joel Webbon and Elijah Schaffer. And I would like to get an actual answer out of the people who attack them so much. And you see, the reason that these two and others like them are gaining in popularity is because they're attempting to address and answer those kinds of questions. And I'll even grant their detractors that they could be wrong. But you have to address the substance of their message. If you don't do that, chastising their tone doesn't mean anything to me. So here, I'll lay this out, asking earnestly as a young man for solutions to these problems in the tamest possible way I can think. Can you tell me in good faith that feminism hasn't caused major problems within society, and that it hasn't in any way influenced the church to the point of leadership often being pretty hesitant to address sins that particularly women struggle with, more so than men? Can you explain to me from a biblical perspective why it's wrong to notice that different racial groups generally perform and behave differently? And maybe they're not always compatible with one another at scale. There is actual data on this. I have read the bell curve. It's uncomfortable. I wish it wasn't true, but I'm afraid that it is. And we need to have a Christian response for the truth, don't we? Can you give me a good explanation as to why so much of our governmental policy supports the nation of Israel to the degree that we currently do? Why do we have pledges to support Israel in our legal documents that allows a state or locality to receive tax-funded emergency aid in the case of a natural disaster? What is that about? Why does this little nation the size of New Jersey have so much influence over American politics? I have a covenantal theology perspective, and dispensationalism is a pretty recent theological idea, and I'm not at all convinced by it. If I was convinced by it, I would convert to Judaism. If the best answer you've got is that the Bible says God will bless those who bless Israel, and your understanding of the word Israel is the state that was founded in 1948, you're going to have to try a lot harder than that. I'm looking at you, Ted Cruz. I could go on and on, but these are some of the starters that I would like to see the same people who attacked Joel and Elijah to just address for me. I get it, you don't like the way that they speak, and maybe you think they take things a little too far sometimes, and maybe I agree with you. But you know what? They're the ones I see taking things somewhere. And people who complain about the way in which they're taking things somewhere typically aren't taking things anywhere. And here's the thing about men. We like taking things places, especially if it means it's going to solve a problem. And when it comes to problems in America, that's a target-rich environment. If you don't like the way Joel and Elijah are addressing topics, then address those same things in the way that you wish they would. Until I see you doing that, well, I'm not really interested on whether or not you think they're being mean or crass. Finger-wagging and consensus shaming is something that works on women and children, and men are neither of those. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. But what do you think? Are you clued into this side of Twitter X? What are your opinions on how the church and Christians should be thinking about and addressing the questions and topics that are raised by people like Joel and Elijah? Whatever you think, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. As always, if you enjoy my content and want to see more, I would really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Hope you're all having a fantastic day, and I will see y'all next time.